Good evening, everyone. I want to call the July 22nd, 2013 Burnsville Planning Commission meeting to order. Welcome to everyone, staff. Welcome, commissioners, and especially to our two new commissioners who will be meeting tonight, Paul Thomas and Jim Bradrick. Welcome, and hope you enjoy your time here with us. With that, the first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Any changes from staff?
None from staff.
Commissioners? None changes. With that, I'd look for a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Julich, second by Commissioner Tahiri. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That passes 5-0. The second item on the agenda is the swearing in of the new commissioners.
If I can have Commissioner Bradrick meet me at the podium, followed by Commissioner Thomas. Please raise your right hand, repeat after me. I, Jim Bradrick, do solemnly swear
I, Jim Bradrick, do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
and faithfully will discharge the duties as a member of the Planning Commission, as a member of the Burnsville Planning Commission of the city of Burnsville,
and will faithfully discharge the duties as a member of the Burnsville Planning Commission in the city of Burnsville,
in the county of Dakota, state of Minnesota,
in the county of Dakota and the state of Minnesota,
to the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment and ability,
So help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
If I can have you sign right here.
Thank you.
Please raise your right hand, repeat after me. I, Paul Thomas, do solemnly swear
I, Paul Thomas, do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Minnesota,
and faithfully will discharge the duties as a member of the Burnsville Planning Commission of the city of Burnsville,
and faithfully will discharge the duties as a member of the Burnsville Planning Commission of the city of Burnsville,
in the county of Dakota and state of Minnesota,
in the county of Dakota and state of Minnesota,
to the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment and ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
If I can get your signature. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. The third item on the agenda is...
Chair, before we proceed, sir, if I may,
Sure.
I would like to extend congratulations to the new commissioners, Commissioner Bradrick and Commissioner Thomas, and to welcome them aboard. Just to let you know, commissioners, we have fun here. One advice to you, come prepared and have fun. Welcome aboard and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
The third item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the May 28th, 2013 Planning Commission meeting. Any changes from staff,
None from staff.
commissioners?
None.
With that, I would entertain a motion.
So move, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Commissioner Singh,
Second.
second by Commissioner Tahiri. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The minutes are approved 5-0. The fourth item on the agenda is a public hearing, Minnwest Bank, River Valley Commons PUD amendment and preliminary and final plat to be known as River Valley Commons Second Edition for a 43-lot subdivision. Mr. Slania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Just this afternoon, I heard from the applicant on this project. They are requesting the item be continued until the Planning Commission meeting. They are requesting August 12th, which is your next regular meeting. They have had some changes within Minnwest Bank, and the applicant is looking to work some things out before they return to the Planning Commission for the public hearing. That being said, the notice was given, it was put in the paper for this evening. If any of the neighbors or surrounding property owners are interested in speaking, we'd encourage you to do that, and we can get those comments onto the public record. Otherwise, it will be back to this body on August 12th.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Slania. With that, I would like to open this to the public for a public hearing. If anybody would like to make comment, please step forward. Yes, you would step up to the podium.
I am Sherry Hank. I live in
All right.
Parkwood Place,
I'm going to get your name. Give
right.
us your name and your address, please.
12209 Parkwood Place.
All right.
So
Thank
we're
you.
we're right across the street from it.
Okay.
So have you seen any of the plans yet? Or is that something you'll see in August?
There have been some plans that were given to us, and I don't know if they'll change, obviously,
Okay.
in August or for August or not.
So 43 subdivided lots, is it still a townhome project or condo or individual lots? Is that known yet, or would that be something discussed in August?
I think Mr. Slaney can probably address that for you.
Certainly. We do have plans. They are public record, so if you'd like to contact me, or we can talk after the meeting, if you'd like to take a look at those, you're welcome to do so.
Okay,
They are proposing all townhome units.
okay,
So in 2011, they had planned 55 units, and they're reducing that down now to 43.
okay.
The existing building would stay as is, and I wouldn't say they're reconfiguring, but they're redesigning what the additional 43 would look like.
Okay. And is the egress still out onto 122nd Street, kind of at the corner of that curve?
Correct.
And is that the sole egress?
Correct.
Okay,
And none of that is proposed to change.
okay. And the last time with the plans too, they proposed like a berm around the outside with trees, kind of to shield it from the neighborhood and from the adjacent neighborhoods. That's still all in the plans?
That is, I think that's subject to change as the Planning Commission takes further look at
Okay, all right.
what they're proposing.
Stories? 2 stories, 3 stories?
They are all 2 stories.
Okay, great. All right, and so you anticipate that the plans will be put out on the August 12th meeting?
They're public now. If I expect this body will review it on the 12th. If that changes, we'll renotice to all the neighbors.
Okay.
So if for some reason it doesn't happen on the 12th, you'll be contacted.
And I can also contact you and come in and take a
Yes.
look at the plans at some time?
Yep.
Great, perfect. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If anybody else has any questions or comments and would like to step forward, feel free to. All right. Seeing nothing, we're going to, I believe, hold this open through the August 12th hearing.
Correct.
So we will not close the public record at this time, and it will be back in front of us then on August 12th at the next regular scheduled meeting.
Correct. Mr. Chair, we do need a motion to continue it.
All right.
Leave the public hearing open.
Fair enough.
I move to continue the public hearing until the next Planning Commission meeting on August 12th.
Second?
Second?
Moved by Commissioner Julich, seconded by Commissioner Bradrick. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes 5-0. And that will be taken up then on August 12th. The next item on the agenda is discussion of uses for I-3 Office Industrial Park zoning. Mr. Slania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Ms. Holey and I are back this evening with some other items that were on the Planning Commission work plan for 2013. This topic is related to the existing and future permitted uses within the I-3 district. This has been a discussion staff has had for a while. We suggested to be placed on the Planning Commission work plan so that this board could have a discussion of those uses and then forward some type of recommendation on to the City Council. If possible, there may be, if needed, I should say there would be an ordinance amendment and other changes. Essentially what we're looking at are the uses that should or shouldn't be permitted in the I-3. The I-3 is the office and industrial zoning designation within the city of Burnsville. It's been intended for corporate headquarters, office, warehouse, wholesaling, research uses. It also includes convention halls, sports facilities, as well as light manufacturing and, as I said, research laboratories. It was created back in 1987, and it is located on the west end of Burnsville. For your reference, here is 35W and 35E, County Road 42. Everything you see here in the dark gray is I-3. We'll get into the number of properties within this zoning district in a little bit, but it does encompass a significant amount of area, 300 acres, both north and south of County Road 42. Back in 1991, the city contracted a study to review essentially what if anything, should be done with the I-3 district. What should the intent be? And out of that study came the specific goals to increase the industrial tax base for the city of Burnsville, provide head of household jobs, and discourage commercial development that would continue or result in strip center development. So really keeping it to a more industrial office warehouse network than much of the commercial. You see everything on the east side of County Road 5 along 42. This is the B3 zoning district. This is all general business. Burnsville Center's located here. Target is located here, and Costco is up here. So it is intended for the retail service districts. Through different interpretations, both of Planning Commission and staff, the term office has opened doors to medical office and other medical users that have now located in the I-3 district. When staff looks at the term medical office, we view something more retail or service orientated in nature, something that could be more focused along County Road 42, for example, but east of County Road 5. Something, again, more retail or service in nature rather than industrial warehouse. And that is really driving the discussion for tonight. In the past, those medical uses have been considered permitted uses within the I-3. There are a number of them down there. I would like to point out that as we discuss this, there are any number of districts that do allow medical uses as permitted. So by taking it out, should the Planning Commission suggest or recommend to take it out of the I-3, we're certainly not eliminating it from the zoning ordinance. There are 6 other districts, B1, B2, B3, B4, mixed, and heart of the city, that all allow medical use as a permitted use. through the language that staff has presented, not only are we clarifying those uses, but we're also adding a definition of a medical office, and that would be used throughout the zoning ordinance to clear up any inconsistencies or gray areas that we have. As we continue, I'm going to ask Ms. Holy to come up. She did some research on surrounding communities and can give you a little more background on the I-3.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, Commissioners. I did do some research on the I-3. I did a survey of the area and found that there's 74 businesses and buildings currently, 74 buildings currently in the I-3 zone. And out of all of them, about 21 buildings currently host multi-tenants. So there's many businesses in one building. That's about 28%. And out of that, there's currently 6 medical users in that district. There's 2 chiropractor offices, 2 dental, a physical therapy, and then another one just labeled general clinic. And those are all the medical uses in that zone that are today working. A little bit of history of the I-3. So it's, like Chris said, it's developed to be employee centers. And then the city priority is to have a strong office and industrial base that attracts local, regional, and national company headquarters. The I-3 district land use and zoning classifications was developed in an effort to prevent from becoming a commercial strip. I also did a little bit of checking with other communities to see what other cities are doing with their industrial zones. Up here. So some of the responses I got were most of the cities I connected were our market cities, so cities similar to the city of Burnsville. Also, I contacted a few outside of that I know have, or that staff suggested have industrial uses similar to ours. So you can see that the city of Edina does allow medical offices in their industrial zone, and that is the only city, along with the city of Blaine allows it as a conditional use permit. Also, the city of New Hope has an industrial zone similar to ours, and they only allow medical labs, which Chris also pointed out that we do currently allow research labs in the I-3 zone. So out of all of the cities I contacted, those are the only 3, well really the only 2 is Edina and Blaine that have opened up for medical offices to be used in the type of zone. So from that, Chris will come and speak to you guys about some of the language we chose to put into the plan. Thank you very much.
The proposed language was included in your packet. The first was the definition. How do we go about trying to organize medical office, clinic, etc.? So staff is proposing medical and dental clinic or office, a facility for the practice of medicine, mental health, optometry, chiropractic service, or dentistry for humans, including ancillary diagnostic laboratories, medical counseling, but not including inpatient or overnight stay. Again, we're trying to focus on same-day facilities that are service in nature. Currently in the I-3, it allows office and service uses, and the term service uses, I believe, is what's got us in somewhat of this quandary now. We want to clarify that excludes medical and dental. B1, we're getting to the same intent, but we've got some different language in the current ordinance. Clinics for human care, so we would include medical and dental clinic or office. Oh, excuse me. Again, The mix also uses clinics for human care, and we would substitute that. The B3 and B4 uses would all have the same language. With that, Commissioners, I think at this point we would ask for some direction from staff. Does the Commission feel this is suitable from staff standpoint based on the intent of the I-3, what's in these past studies, what's in the comprehensive plan, an inventory of what some of the surrounding communities are doing? What direction does the Planning Commission think we should take? From there, we would certainly prepare the proper ordinance amendments, if there are any, and bring it back, and that would be a full public hearing for an ordinance amendment at that time. With that, Commissioners, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Slaney. I'm sure we have questions. Commissioner Singh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, there are 21 multi-tenant buildings in the B3 area that we're talking about. Now, a multi-tenant building, would that one of the tenants or a tenant or tenants can have retail business in there, in that building?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Let me just speak to the multi-tenant. Some of those buildings were constructed from the beginning as multi-tenant. Some of them, due to change in ownership or tenant space, chose to break up their larger building for smaller tenants based on market conditions and who was interested in the space and so forth. So there is fluctuation. Typically, once it's a multi-tenant building, it will always be a multi-tenant building, but the size of those spaces can grow and shrink as different operators are in there. But that, sorry, to your point, that just because they're in a multi-tenant building doesn't mean they're entitled to sell clothing or other retail operations.
If I may follow. If there is a retail business in one of the multi-tenant building, would that business be grandfathered in with the change of language?
They would. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, that's a great question. Whether it's retail or even one of these medical users that we're talking about, a chiropractic clinic, they would be allowed to continue in the current space. They could not enlarge their operation, as to say they couldn't necessarily take the adjacent tenant space and double their size, but they would be protected by the state's grandfathered rights and would be allowed to continue until they chose to find another location.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chris.
Commissioner?
Chris, you mentioned that I think Edina, the people would have the opportunity for a conditional use permit. Is that something that we would be looking at in this area, or can you explain to me, would that work in that instance if a medical office then came back to the city, even though it's not allowed, they could apply for a conditional use permit and could, if it passed, could use that space?
Certainly. Commissioners, that's a great question. From a staff standpoint, we didn't spend much time exploring the conditional use permit, but that is one way to go, rather than, excuse me, let me get to the language, revise this, take it out of permitted uses and add it as a conditional. That would, simply what that does is requires each of those uses to come in front of the Planning Commission and the City Council for a public hearing before they would be permitted, before any construction would take place. Conditional uses, I want to be specific, unless they are not following the ordinance criteria or can't provide sufficient parking or something like that, they are intended to be allowed in those districts. So if it's if the Commission would see any of these as nuisance or a problem or just uses that shouldn't be in this district, conditional isn't necessarily the way to go, because the intent is, with the right conditions, with the right parking and so forth, they should go in there. That was just not something staff explored, but I think it's a good point, and I think the commission could consider that.
No, I'm sorry. Chris, could you give me a little background on what brought this to the topic? Because I know there's a fair amount of businesses down there now. There's specialty tile places. There are really kind of west of the railroad tracks. I know there's kind of division there. What brought just medical and dental offices to the topic for us this evening?
Simply, it was something staff discovered within the last 18 months or so. We had a building owner that was down there. He has an existing multi-tenant building, had come across a chiropractor as a possible tenant, and contacted staff. And I was actually the one that took the call, and I said, no, it wouldn't be a permitted use. You would need to go in front of the Planning Commission and Council either as a PUD or some other type of approval. And we talked about some of the other medical that are down there, went through some research, and in the end, I was incorrect, and it would be a permitted use based on the historic practice staff has taken. And that kind of started the discussion. Well, is that really the way we want to go? Is that what we want to see in the I-3? Or do we want to keep that to the commercial districts? To your point, there are some retail and some small showroom operations, and again, that is allowed in the I-3. If you're manufacturing or producing, you are allowed a very small percentage of your space for retail. Abdallah Chocolate is a good example. They're allowed whatever the square footage is to have that shop, understanding their main operation is production.
Okay. Mr. Slaney, I understood your explanation on the conditional use permit might not be the way to go. Would a PUD be better in the situation I'm looking for is where we want them to come before us in the council if they want to go there, but not so that it would be allowed necessarily just by using the meeting conditions. So if it's something that's very attractive, the council in the city would have a mechanism of getting them in there if that's where they want to go, but not encouraging it. Yeah, does that make sense?
It does, Mr. Chair. That's a good discussion. I would say the council or the city already has that as a tool, and I know from some of the research that's how some of the existing medical users got in there, is through a PUD. So we wouldn't necessarily list it as an
option,
as a PUD option, but let's say, for example, even if the proposed language you see in front of you was passed and became ordinance, if a property owner and a tenant really wanted a space and they wanted to get in front of the Planning Commission and Council, they could still apply for a PUD and request.
Because my understanding then would be we're supposed to weigh the benefits and the disadvantages, and if it would be good for the city, then...
Exactly. How many employees would they be bringing? How
Right.
much space are they occupying? All those things could be weighed.
And I'm just thinking if it's something that would, for instance, be bringing in 20 employees with very good professional jobs, you don't want to just say, well, no, you can't go there.
That's a very good point.
Mr. Singh?
Chris, back to my original question about retail tenants in a multi-tenant building. If they are existing now, would we need language, since we're talking about language, to grandfather them in? We've got to put it someplace. Can't leave it hanging.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we have existing grandfathered language in the ordinance
Good.
that would
Thank you.
address those.
Commissioner Julie?
Thank you, Chair. Chris, do you want any comments on your language at all?
Absolutely. We'll
Okay.
take any comments you have.
All right. In the definition, one condition you might not be covering there might be sleep apnea, because that's sort of quasi-overnight care for diagnostics, but
That's a good point.
I don't,
Thank
you know, like I'll do a plug, Minnesota Heart and Lung Institute over in the medical district off Nicollet there. And then I see you cover language for B1, mix, and I3, but I thought you mentioned there were 6 districts that would still be applied. Would the B1 just be carried across to the other B dashes?
It is. Thank you, Commissioner Julich. I breezed through that too quickly. B1, 2, and 3 all have the same lists, and the B4 actually included medical and dental clinic or office. So we simply stole that language and applied it to the other districts.
Okay, and then in that language there, it's not clear that you're referencing the definition there because you don't cap dental clinic or office. So just make sure it's clear that you're because it's a long phrase, you know.
Absolutely.
Make sure that you reference the definition. And again, I'm trying to still, and maybe one of the other commissioners asked this earlier, and maybe I still didn't follow, but what was driving this originally? A more of a concern to preserve the homogeneity of the I3 district, or what were you? What's the goal?
That's a great question. It's really driven by the market right now. With vacancies, I don't want to say a lot, but there are vacancies in the industrial districts, and oftentimes due to their location or style of building, size of the building, they're leasing at lower rents, which is attractive for tenants, and that's pulling, I don't want to say stealing, but it is pulling retail, service, medical users away from Burnsville Center and other areas in Burnsville and bringing them down to the I3 district. And certainly the industrial property owners are happy to have a tenant and happy to have that income. But over the last couple of years, we're seeing more and more of it, where in a different market, when industrial was a little bit heavier, those buildings were full, and nobody was really entertaining a chiropractor per se because they could find another tenant. So I apologize if I didn't bring that up earlier.
Okay, thank you. But that helps me a lot. I just wanted to know exactly what was driving it.
Chair.
Sure.
Chris, the 6 people, the 2 chiropractors, 2 dental offices, 1 physical therapy and general medical clinic, do we have a general idea of, have those all moved in the last year? Have they been there for 5 years? Do we have a general idea of that subset of 6 businesses, how long they've been there?
Most of them have been there at least 3 or more years.
Okay. And then, I'm sorry. Sure. If we take this forward, I'm assuming there'd be a public hearing, and then would the city notify just the building owners in the I3 district? So if I own a building, then I would be notified, or would also the tenants? How does that work?
It would be specific to the property owner, and it would be at their discretion if they were going to notify the individual tenants. If something went through, if an ordinance passed, the city would contact those 5 or 6 medical users and put them on acknowledgement or contact them so they're aware of that change. but we would not go through and notify each tenant. And typically, even the business notification of the property owner would be something at staff's discretion. So if that's something we in the Planning Commission feel suitable, we'd certainly do that. So everybody's on the same playing field and aware of the possible changes.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Yes.
Sure, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr.
Here.
Chair. I have a question on the research basis that we did on other cities. Were there any specific reason most of the cities or market cities that I'm looking at, they either denied or resist bringing this use into their warehouse or their I3 business? Or and the other question is that if there is a reason for it or a cause for it or any explanation that could help us to either take this further or work around it, please.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure. I did contact a handful of cities, and it's a survey, so these are the ones that replied back to me. Though I got a few different explanations. Some said they just don't allow any type of office or retail use in their industrial zones, so that excluded this medical from that. Some were on a basis of they thought medical and office, because it tends to be kind of a service industry with high traffic, that their industrial zones weren't providing the parking, or they didn't want to expand the parking to allow those types of businesses in. So there was their kind of boundary from preventing medical offices in, is they really limited their parking to really stop that high kind of flow in those zones. So those were some of the reasons that these cities chose not to allow any medical, because of their retail and service kind of orientation, and then the parking as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
So if we come to this point, Chris, that we have to decide whether we allow this or not, or based on the research and history, obviously there could be some conflict of whether design or site design or traffic flow. Obviously, a unique, prestigious medical office building would hesitant to move into a big tire warehouse building. I wouldn't, definitely. So I can see why some of the cities are reluctant to just open the door for any applicants to come in. If we go that route and do more research and study and decide that could not be as easy as we thought, is there a way that I3 section could be broken down into maybe another subdivisions, so the parking, the design, and traffic flow doesn't conflict with individual small medical office clinic next to 10,000 square foot, let's say, for example, a tire warehouse?
Commissioners, that is something to discuss. I guess from a staff standpoint, much of the area is developed. Not to say it's 100%, but there, I would say there's less than 10 parcels in the area yet to be developed. And I guess I would be hesitant to further divide up the I3, because it's in such close proximity to each other. All these tenants or all these building owners are competing for the same tenants. I think we'd want to try to be consistent or try to play fair, so that everybody was pursuing the same tenants and things like that. It is something we can look into. I just don't have all the details sorted out off the top of my head.
So we will still open to discussion, further discussion, if the situation moves to
next stages as well.
Correct. To that point, there is, if I can get back to this map, there is a pocket of limited, I'm trying to think of the language, limited business, industrial limited business, thank you. In this, prior to you hitting the railroad tracks, but still west of County Road 5, there is a limited business district. That's where IHOP falls and some of the other tenants in that area. That was intended for limited retail or service. That was really intended to support the industrial districts. I can't get into all the details of where it ended up and how those tenants ended up in there, but the planning, or excuse me, the council did consider that and say we should have some restaurants in this area. We should have a dry cleaner. We should have some districts or service uses. They happen to fall near County Road 5 where the other service districts fell versus maybe more centrally located in the I-3. And that, to be honest, that sometimes that does create confusion with property owners and staff as to what's permitted where when you've got that small pocket of additional uses in the I-3.
Thank you, Mr. Slaney. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a follow-up question. Sure. Chris, so for industrial zoning, we have I-3, and that's for light industrial development, right? And
Office and industrial.
So what is the next level for heavy or
certainly
more compact industrial?
We've got I-1, which is just industrial park, and that is for the majority of Burnsville. That is north of Highway 13 and even north and south of Cliff Road. So that's kind of the north end of town. Somewhat of the older, the Lark Industrial Park and some of those. Many of those buildings are aging, which is really one of the driving factors of the creation of the I-3, is to grow new and maybe a little bit nicer looking industrial. We have an I-2, which is currently designated for the Minnesota River Quadrant. So that is north of 13 but west of 35W. We have I-3, and then we also have Gateway Medium and Gateway Heavy. Those are immediately north of 13, west of 35W, where the old and the new Menards are. The landscape company is up there, Gens Ryan. Shop Jimmy just put in their sign up on that warehouse. Those are intended for heavier uses, where they're going to have equipment outside, materials outside. Velmere has a space up there. RDO is a large John Deere implement dealer where they've got equipment sitting out. So there is a good mix of industrial. The intent with I-3 is to keep things inside, keep it a little bit cleaner and a little bit quieter than up along Highway 13.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comment, Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess in general, I agree with the language and the use changes you're proposing. I like the fact that a PUD gives us some flexibility to bring in a new tenant that we find attractive. But I'm going to reiterate the comments about the CUP. I would like to see a little bit more investigation on the use of the CUP, and I don't know if this applies or not. My concerns are an existing tenant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if he's invested in his space and wants to do a small expansion, I mean, what provisions do we have for him? And the same thing for the existing building owner. I mean, if he loses a tenant and he's made an investment in that medical type space, what provisions can we offer him for flexibility?
That's a great point.
Any other thoughts or discussions?
I would have to agree. When we do a public hearing, I'd like to hear from some of the building owners as to how they feel about limiting what their tenants could be. I don't know if any of them in the building of their buildings anticipated going after, a medical office. But I guess I'd like to get that feedback and get that understanding. I do believe that there could be, some extensive tenant finish that could have been in place for somebody that may want to expand or move, and the expenses there. So I'd like to understand that a little bit. So I guess I'd like to get some feedback from the owners.
That's a good point. Any other comments or discussion points we'd like to pass on to Mr. Slaney and staff?
Commissioners, if I can just point out a couple things. Let's see. Getting to the nonconformity and the grandfather clause and things like that, just to keep these in mind as we go ahead, for a medical use that's in there that would be grandfathered in if these ordinance changes occurred. If the space was vacant for more than 6 months, the building owner would not have the ability to rent to another medical user. So if a chiropractor's in there now, vacates, 6 months, time goes by, their grandfathered status becomes null and void. So that's not a lot of time, but something to keep in mind. And I don't know the language specifically, and we'll get that to you. There is the ability to expand a grandfathered business. You cannot enlarge by more than 50%. So you couldn't double your space. You could grow a limited amount, and there are some provisions, and we can get that to you. I guess my question for the commission at this point, would you suggest staff bring this back for another work session discussion with some of that language? Would you suggest coming back with notification for a public hearing?
My follow-up to you would be along the lines of the concerns over here. Is it practical or is it available to write in some kind of sort of grandfathered pre-existing condition with a CUP like was discussed here? I'm just wondering of the practicalities of that. If there is a way that can be set forth, or is that sort of really tough?
There are ways to do it. We've done it in other districts, and I would expect the best way to do it would be to give a certain date in the future.
Okay.
So if we said 5 years or whatever, and set a specific date, and that would allow existing uses to continue and to grow, and maybe they wouldn't be subject, they wouldn't be deemed as grandfathered, but it would put everyone on notice so that in 5 years or something like that, then these ordinance changes take in full effect, and medical is no longer an option.
I think that, because that's what I'm kind of hearing as the concern, is the pre-existing businesses there that we don't want to compromise, but it sounds like there's not a whole lot of disagreement as to the going forward into the future of limiting that, if I'm reading the Commissioner Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you repeat what you said earlier? When does a building owner lose the grandfather status? You said some mentions on, if there's let's say, for example, there's a chiropractor in the building. The chiropractor leaves. That place becomes vacant, whatever space they were using, and the building owner is not able to bring in a similar business in that space in 6 months,
6 months.
then that building owner loses the grandfather status?
Correct.
I hope that doesn't come back to haunt us. You know, the economy is picking up right now, but let's say, look, 2 years ago or last year, for that matter, there was vacant space that were vacant for quite a long time. And I can understand if a building owner has a space and, okay, after 6 months he loses the grandfather status, that space might be vacant for years.
And that is a risk. That specific language is, again, tied to a use that shouldn't have been in that district to begin with. And there are exceptions. There are situations where the building owner doesn't want to lose a specific user, or they've built out this tenant space so that it's really only a chiropractor would want to go back in there, or a gas station or something like that. So in that situation, they'd come in front of the Planning Commission or Council as a PUD and explain the situation. It does happen, I would say a majority of the time, when those 6-month deadlines come up and the spaces are vacated. Those maybe wouldn't have been businesses the Planning Commission or Council would want back in that building anyway.
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
But
Chris,
you never know.
okay, let's go back to the example I gave. Here is a building that has a medical office, medical services here. Next door is a chiropractor. Chiropractor leaves. That medical, the neighboring medical business there can only take, let's say, half of the space that the chiropractor was using. That's almost saying that they wouldn't be able to do that because they want to expand. That's a business, the medical services clinic or whatever is there. We are writing them in, that they're grandfathered in, and they can't expand their business. You know what's going to happen? They will probably leave.
That's a good
I
discussion
mean, I'm
point.
saying that if the chiropractor has left, why don't you allow this medical clinic to expand and use the space that the chiropractor was using? What's the problem with that?
It would get to the underlying zoning. You know, if the consensus was medical is more of a service use and should be in a different zoning district, then we should direct them to a different district. If a situation like that occurs, the tenant and the business owner can approach the city through a PUD, and say we're successful, we're growing in jobs, we want to stay here and take another 10,000 square feet of this building, and as the chair said, that would be something certainly the council would want to explore.
Come to the commission with a CUP or PUD and go back to the city.
Absolutely.
I'm okay with that. And I support the language that is recommended by staff. But I would suggest that we have another, we don't need a special meeting for it. It could be on an agenda item, one of our meetings, so that we are all on the same page before we have, put it down for public comments.
Staff can certainly do that. We can look at the definition again, make sure we're not missing out anything, make sure we're using proper language. We'll provide some information on the grandfathered clause, what's currently in the ordinance, and we'll speak with the city attorney because I know we have done some future sunset dates. I just don't remember the details.
It sounds like, and if I get it wrong, it sounds like there is at least some interest in some manner, if possible, of protecting the folks that are already there. I think so. I think if we add that would be the direction.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we can do that. I'm not sure which future meeting, but we'll tack it on similar to this as a discussion item at the end of one of the meetings.
Thank you.
Meet with every.
One last, and
Yep.
Chris, I'm in agreement. I guess what I'm trying to get my head around is two quick things. How often do we, as a city, go into an existing zoning area and put additional restrictions on a zoning area after it's built out?
Not very often.
So this is kind of new for us. Okay.
Absolutely.
I was just trying to understand is because
may-
if I'm a building owner in that area, and I built a building and knew what the rules were, and then all of a sudden the rules changed, that's kind of disturbing for me. But like I said, we may get some feedback from the owners that they don't believe it's that big a deal. I do believe in that area there's really only a small section. I mean, quite honestly, anything on County Road 42 is where some of these folks would want to land. You get much off of 42 north or south, you're getting into real heavy industrial, well, in this zoning.
Right.
Not heavy industrial like an I-1, and it wouldn't be feasible for them to be in that area.
Quite possibly. Right.
So my last comment, I said, and we've got lawyers, and there's really from judicial to 5, really, is where this is the multi-tenants, and we've got some, and so I just need to feel a little better about why just medical and dental offices versus lawyers or whatever else may be in that area.
That's a good point.
Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Julie, did you have something?
Just a couple things on CUP versus PUD. Does the owner have to sign the application for a CUP, or?
In both cases, the owner needs to sign.
And is it quite a bit more effort to do a PUD? Do you have to?
The process, the timing, and the cost are similar, almost identical. It is the criteria to which the Planning Commission can judge the application.
Okay, so from a applicant standpoint or a city standpoint, does it matter whether it's a CUP or PUD application?
Threshold for a CUP is quite a bit easier.
Okay, so
There's less gray area, whereas with a PUD, you're weighing the benefits versus what they're asking for.
okay, and then just we're focused on the medical uses in that area for the purposes of this meeting, but there's quite a bit of light retail also. You've got a number of, Abdallah's. It's their factory, but they've got a retail store. There's some tile and granite stores, same thing. I think there's some cabinet shops, etc. Isn't the district somewhat have a fairly mixed use now? Why are we focusing just on the medical uses versus the existing, I'll call them quasi-retail uses within the district?
Good point. Because the quasi-retail and the showrooms have specific provisions spelled out in the ordinance. It's based on either percent of your tenant space, not to exceed 1,000 square feet or something like that. So Abdallah and other industrial spaces, granite places, they are entitled by rights of the zoning ordinance to have some small showroom.
Okay, but
Staff and council feel that we seem to have a good handle on it. That seems to be working. We're not creating conflicts or having issues there.
Isn't there some pure retail in the area too? I think there's a soccer store, Soccer US. I don't know the name of it. I think in that building there's a few. I know there's medical uses there. I think there's some other retail type uses. It just doesn't. It seems like if you're going to address the issue, do you want to take it piecemeal, or do you want to address all the non-I3 I'll call it non-I3 compatible, for lack of a better term, uses.
We can certainly do that. A lot of them, for example, the soccer store, they're non-conforming today. They're grandfathered in. I don't have the history of how or why they got in there, but they would be subject to the current requirements. If they vacated or tried to enlarge, I'd have that same conversation with them.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Terry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris, we all know the terminology, the phrase grandfathering is a very open, very, in my opinion, my experience, I'm open to lots of discussion, conversation, and city permitting issues and so forth. I believe we have to be very, very explicit and careful on our language of this, what this grandfather rule means. For example, one of the situations that I'm thinking about is, for example, we have a freestanding building, medical dental clinic, and the owner has a big enough lot or property can expand, but not necessarily move into next space. Does that also comply with construction expansion as far as grandfathering, or we put a limitation of new construction? It only applies to empty existing space, or a square footage limitation for expansion?
For this discussion, based on the language we're talking about, it would be tied to the use, whether it's new construction or creeping into an adjacent tenant space. If it's a dentist, and we've deemed that to be a use that isn't permitted in I3, they would be subject to that 50% enlargement, whether it was, again, adding onto the building or moving into another tenant space. So it is hard to distinguish, but right now we're just talking uses versus structures.
Mr. Slane, I'm guessing that the grandfather clause is fairly specific and is, for lack of a better term, has legalese so that it's spelled out exactly, which would then apply to this, correct?
Correct. And for our next discussion, we'll get that language to you so we can review it.
Any other discussions?
Thank you, Chris.
Comments?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Slane. Do we
Thank-
need a motion or anything on this, or just
We do not. Staff will be back as soon as we can.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think the sixth item on the agenda is any updates from commissioners, staff.
I do have one for the commission. Again, as we discussed, August 12th is the next meeting. We have a draft agenda in front of you. We will be adding the River Valley Commons project to that. I'd also like to note, based on some changes the Planning Commission made last year, come August, we'll be looking for a new chair and vice chair and Heart of the City representative. So as that next meeting approaches, keep that in the back of your mind.
Thank you, Mr. Slania. Anything else? All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Motion by Commissioner Singh, second.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Bradrick. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned.